Hello, I am Professor Eric Martin, and I'm here to help us set up the next discussion section for History 101. And we got a lot to cover in the next discussion board, but it's not as overwhelming as it appears. So let me explain this a little bit here. We've just finished the second exam, and we have chronologically finished up our examination of the classical period. So this is the period between 500 BC and 500 AD. And then from 500 AD until 1500 is what historians describe as the medieval period. And that medieval period is divvied up, conveniently enough, into an early medieval period, 500 AD to about 1000 AD, and then 1000 to 1500. Now, these dates, they're convenient dates for conceptualizing grand eras, okay? And that's what we're going to do in the next set of discussions. What I want us to do is come up with general characteristics about what different civilizations look like during the medieval period. So, we've got two videos, and you're required to watch both of them. Two videos for this coming week. One of them is focused on early economies, and the other one is focused on family and household. Okay, so that's Bridging World History Units 8 and Bridging World Histories Units 9. Take good notes. Think about the situation in both those videos. And then we've got two chapters from Worlds of History, but you are not required to read all of them. We're looking at Chapter 8, Migrations, Trade, and Travel, and we're looking at Chapter 9, Love, Sex, and Marriage. In Chapter 8, you are required to read at least 2 secondary sources and 1 primary source. In Chapter 9, you are required to read at least 1 secondary source and 2 primary sources. So make sure you know the difference between a secondary source and a primary source. So you got to watch both videos, but I've tried to set it up in such a way so that even though we're covering 2 chapters, your individual reading for any chapter will only be about as much as it would be if we were just doing 1 chapter. Okay, so those are the readings. Now, here's what we're going to do with those readings. If you've already looked in the discussion board, you'll notice that this week's discussion looks very different than the discussions have so far. Because what we have this week is a separate discussion thread for every single document out of the 2 chapters. And this is how we're going to approach it. There's not a grand discussion for us this week. I want us to focus on individual documents. And here's how I want us to do it. In Chapter 8, the primary sources, I want y'all to focus on distinguishing between economic characteristics, social characteristics, political characteristics, economic characteristics of whatever civilization is involved in that document. Okay? So thinking about questions such as, does the document primarily provide us clues into one of those characteristics? What does the medieval economy of India look like based on this document? And don't get caught up in it. Try to think about, what does it mean, economy? Does that just mean money? If I only see someone say that they went somewhere to buy something, is that economy? Or could economy be broader than that? Same thing with culture, same thing with social, same things with political. You're going to have to think a little bit about what these terms actually mean as we apply them to the primary sources. So Chapter 8, distinguishing between economic, social, political, and cultural characteristics of the civilizations involved. Now, chapter 9, it's almost exclusively focused on culture. All right? So really what we have with chapter 9 is comparative culture by looking at the issues of love, sex, and marriage. So I want y'all to basically discuss each of those documents individually, right? No one has to discuss them all, right? If you are required to participate in this discussion, then you are required to discuss one source from chapter 8, one primary source from chapter 8, and two primary sources from chapter 9. And in the end, as a group, y'all should discuss all the sources by the end of the week. Now, in terms of the secondary sources, what I want y'all to do with the secondary sources is I want y'all just to discuss what's the main point of the secondary source. Give us a summary to make sure that we understand it. If you're required to participate in the discussion, you don't have to comment on every secondary source. Comment on one of them, okay? Comment on one of them. Let's make sure that we understand what's going on. Okay. This is going to be a very good week for those of you who feel like you need some sort of boost to your grade, because if you're required to participate in the discussion, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to go above and beyond the call of duty to perhaps get a better score on the class participation than you have been. If you are not required to participate in the discussion this week, there's a lot of documents to cover. So joining in and participating is a good way to get some extra credit. The documents for this week are really cool. We've got this piece by the secondary sources, this piece by Patrick Manning, who was my dissertation advisor, by the way, so that's kind of cool. Looking at mass migrations, and then a really interesting piece by Linda Noreen Schaefer looking at Southernization. What is Southernization? She makes a very interesting argument about some of the foundations of Western ideas. And then in chapter 9, we have a piece by Kevin Riley himself, the editor of our book, looking at love in medieval Europe, India, and Japan, and this idea that maybe not all cultures think about love the same way. And maybe the way that people thought about love 1,000 years ago is not the way we think about love now. And then the documents, the primary sources in chapter 9 go along really well with the Kevin Riley document. So that is basically what I have. The primary sources are fun to sort through. Chapter 8, you've got this piece by Faxian, right? Chinese monk travels the Silk Roads to go to India, the home of Buddhism, to collect Buddhist documents in return. You've got this piece by Ibn Battuta, who's a really interesting Moroccan who decides to travel, go on the Hajj to Mecca, and then he goes to India and he writes all about all these different places he's been and what it's like on the road. You've got this piece by Pegulati. I wish my Italian was better. It's a really interesting merchant's handbook because he's really telling you if you are going to attempt to go on to the Silk Roads to do trading, these are things you need to bring with you. This is how far you can expect to get from place to place. It's a little bit like one of those Lonely Planet guides for the medieval period. And then the primary sources in chapter 9, read them. We get a couple of different pieces here. Some of them might be familiar to you. All right. But we got a couple of different pieces here from medieval Western Europe, from the Byzantine Empire, from Japan, from Cambodia, and different ideas of what love and sex and marriage look like in these different places. All right. Now this discussion is not going to have a nice, tight conclusion this week, just due to the way that we're conducting it. But hopefully, you'll get some general sense about what the medieval period looked like that will help us as we proceed. And then also, finally, don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. The mission, right, is to learn how to distinguish between political, social, cultural, and economic information that you find in a source. So pull it out. Okay, that is all I've got for you today. As usual, if you've got questions about the class, feel free to give me a call here at the office. Send me an email. Drop by during my office hours. And until next time, enjoy your historical studies.